He didn't hold with your father's ideals, thought he should have stayed here and not gotten involved.
You fought in the Clone Wars?
Yes.
25 years prior to Episode 2's release, the Clone War had been evoked, and it fostered a lot of curiosity from the fanbase. But someone else was eager to see it on screen, George Lucas himself, who had waited a long time for the technology to evolve, and in 2000, time had come. For the Clone War though, he needed a new environment that we can likely trace back to old script conference held for Episode 5, with writer Leith Brackett, on which we can read Planet Tats, the rock desert planet, grey, colorless, with a civilization living in caves. With this rough idea, he went to the artistic department to launch the conceptual researches, and he did so, well, the week before Episode 1's release, to the dismay of the artists who thought they could enjoy a little break between the two movies. And so what must be noted here is that the concept artists didn't work on a script, but with mere ideas of locations and actions from Lucas. The inspiration was to base their work after ants and termite mounds, and then to give it an exotic twist, designers blew up the scale, giving us those gigantic structures. Another influence was then added, Gothic art. Just like the Gungans were a local species with an unfamiliar aesthetic, the Geonosians would carry on this contrast of indigenous people relying on their technology. Only this time it wouldn't be modeled after Art Nouveau, but rather Gothic, Gaudi-inspired architecture. On the other hand, a production team was sent to the southwest to shoot thousands of landscape stills that would later be used to create Geonosis backgrounds. To populate these caves, Doug Chiang decided to give the Geonosians the look initially planned for the Nemoidians in Episode 1. They were supposed to be the creators of the battle droids, and thus looked like them. Since now the Geonosians were the ones who designed the B-1 droids, it was logical for them to design them with their own appearance. By the way, those droids would get a slightly redder touch to match with Geonosis' color scheme. The other faction also needed some design, namely the clones themselves. A variety of artists tackled their appearance, trying to combine both the Stormtrooper's look, for continuity's sake, and the Mandalorian one, as they were modeled after Jango Fett. But try to keep in mind that at the time, clones were not as familiar to us as they are now. The audience was rather used to Stormtroopers, and thus could mistakenly associate them with the bad guys. To prevent this, the animators carefully built sequences in which the clones were seen with Jedi leading them, or simply put them in the background so that subconsciously we could consider them as allies. In the end, not a single clone trooper costume would be made for the movie, as George Lucas decided to go full digital with them. Yet the design and model making process were key steps to ensure continuity among the departments. And at each step of the pre-production, it was an ingenious combination of the artist's skills and creativity and Lucas's vision, whether for drawings, models, and CG assets. Talking about models, some really large-scale ones were built by experienced carvers. Carved out of foam, it was then painted before being either photographed against a blue screen or composited into landscape backgrounds. And props to the team in charge of the arena. It took 8 sculptors to create it and spread across 5 meters. Also, what's interesting is how they were building while already thinking ahead in terms of camera movements.
The camera move is going to start somewhere in here and use this corner as if the gunships have come out, they're coming around here, they're heading that way, and they're kind of flying past this piece, so the camera will come across this way.
But then, how do you make those sequences? George Lucas once said that his credo was, "A picture is worth 1,000 words, so let's not talk." He thus charged the artistic department to produce concept paintings, for everyone to agree on the colors and overall vibe of the different environments. Please meet Ryan Church and Eric Tiemens, 2 gifted artists working on digital softwares. But those images, even though pretty amazing, were not enough to understand the kind of movements the sequence would be made of.
The kind of movies that I make, which are very action-oriented, very complex visually, I really couldn't do it without some kind of pre-visualization process. Eventually we came to rely on that department to really define how the movie would go together.
Well, that's why here comes the pre-visualization department. When working on a Droid Foundry sequence, actors were shot against blue screens, so the sets were fully digital, and it satisfied George Lucas to the point that he'd go full animatics with the Clone Wars, without any storyboards. He really let the animators run wild in creativity, simply asking them to come up with many action sequences from which he'd pick and decide how to link them. Dan Gregoire and his team truly made a groundbreaking job for the time, sometimes confusing Lucas whether some shots were pre-visualizations or finished shots from ILM. Once all those sequences were designed, the animatics teams handed over to Rob Coleman's CG department, whose job was to achieve photorealistic renderings. Here, the challenge was enhanced by Episode 2's nature. It was the first movie shot digitally. Thus, it didn't hide some minor defaults, like classic film used to do. On the one hand, all the CG assets had to be carefully built for a realistic look, and on the other hand, some live-action material had to be shot against blue screens. Of course, that was a challenge for the actors, who were not used to something like this.
You have no idea what some of these things can look like or some of these things will be. So you just kind of, get out there and act like everything's normal.
This step will also lock in the choices made by the teams in terms of directing style. For the Clone Wars, the inspiration would be combat films, using a lot of handheld shaky shots and other distinct camera movements, such as zoom-ins. The massive amount of sequences produced logically led to some of them being deleted from the final cut. It could be minor bits of actions, in which some elements may eventually make their way into Episode 3. It could also be bigger plot variations, such as the Red on the droid control ship deleted sequence.
Someone's got to shut down these droids! Don't worry. They're taken care of.
A group of Jedi was supposed to go on a side mission to deactivate the droids. Led by Ki-Adi-Mundi, the commando made it to the control ship and managed to shut down the droids. But soon after, they realized that the Separatists have learned from their mistakes on Naboo during Episode 1, and droids get reactivated. In the end, both the freedom given to the animators and the marvelous ideas they came with deeply changed the sequence's initial plans.
It's interesting, the evolution editorially of the Clone War battle, because the initial concept was that we would only really see it from the point of view of the gunships flying in high altitude over it. But as the sequences developed, and in particular the art department came in with many of these fabulous designs for tanks and walking machines, it became tantalizing to create some of those machines up close. We all reacted quite positively and with a lot of enthusiasm for the battle scenes, and so they began to grow. And more time was spent on the ground in each subsequent cut of the film. And what started out as a somewhat detached sequence as a backdrop became something very up close and in your face.
Of course, we simply can't tackle the Geonosis sequence without addressing the backlash it faced due to CGI shots. True, it is hard to deny that some have poorly aged. Yet it sounds to me unfair to flame what was actually avant-garde work. ILM teams worked with state-of-the-art techniques, and even though they might have underestimated the effect of time, they also allowed the industry to move on. In that perspective, the following movie's realistic look is partly due to them, to the point that Dune, for instance, could be seen as a distant offspring of the Geonosis battle. Yet, it's also interesting to search for its predecessors, and looking backwards, the Hoth battle appears as a clear ancestor from which Geonosis stems from. For that reason, I've made another video with my friend Crazy Kazi to cover the Hoth battle that you'll find on his channel. And he gently accepted to participate in this one, to offer you an in-depth analysis of Geonosis iconography and thematics. Crazy Kazi, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Starren. Let's dive into the symbolism of the sequence, starting with... Deserts in literature can have many meanings. They can symbolize transformation, testing, punishment, or even exile. All things that our protagonist and Anakin undergoes during this sensitive time in his life, as he's crossing the threshold into adulthood and must face these obstacles and challenges. From coming to terms with the death of his mother, which happened in another desert, the forbidden love that he holds for Padme, dealing with the unknown fate of his master and father figure, and learning to control or cope with the growing loneliness and anger he feels every day. Anakin must undergo many obstacles in his life, and, similar to Tatooine, the barrenness of Geonosis shows the isolation that he feels when others try to relate to him, and what he goes through on his journey to becoming a Jedi, as he is a unique case in that he knew his mother and was separated from her, and he feels attachments of love that the Jedi forbid and are asking him to suppress. So as he reaches Geonosis, he feels this loneliness, and on the verge of death he gives himself to Padme emotionally. The rocky desert is representative of a lot of the challenges that Anakin faces internally as he comes of age and has his ideals questioned, as his mother taught him one way and the Jedi another, and he questions which relationships he should trust, from Padme to Obi-Wan and to Palpatine. Anakin is not the only character that the symbolism of the desert is important for, as it directly affects his master in Obi-Wan. The big obstacle for him is learning to be a teacher and a father when he wasn't ready to do so. So he must learn on the job, as Anakin has proven to be quite the rebel. So he must try to be a father when he was only ready to be a brother. Deserts create a strong sense of isolation, which aligns perfectly with the Separatist goals. They exploit the emptiness to their advantage, using this planet as a hiding place much like the rebels used Hoth. However, the Separatists have far more sinister motives. Unlike the rebels, who are pursued by the Empire, the Separatists are hiding from a faction that has no army yet, and isn't actively hunting them. It's also symbolic of the Separatists' cowardly nature and philosophy, as similar to the droids that they use, they rely on technology to fight for their cause, rather than doing it for themselves or using people. They also were willing to do this against the peaceful Republic, one with no known army, highlighting the Terminator attitude that they have when it comes to enforcing their ideals. There's also a definite industrial nature to them, as shown in the factory, as they view soldiers as that, completely expendable, with a price, relying on sheer numbers to overwhelm rather than any skill or true tactical advantages. Attack of the Clones, and especially its ending planet, highlight the themes of the dangers of deception, as deserts are empty and barren. Similar to the information behind the origins of the clone army, a good chunk of the film is spent trying to decipher mysteries, and similar to the desert, there aren't many clues on where to go next, as any direction you head in the desert may lead to death, like trying to find the truth behind the assassination attempts, the clone army, or the Shroud of the Dark Side itself, and Count Dooku as well, as the new antagonist that has been bringing their enemies together. Similar to The Empire Strikes Back, Attack of the Clones is filled with smoke. We see it when Anakin and Padme first arrive to Geonosis, as they use it to conceal their landing. There's smoke from the foundry machines, and even smoke that's been made from dust clouds shown from the fallen core ships near the end of the Battle of Geonosis. And more importantly, the results of the smoke in this particular scene here leaves both sides blinded, as it becomes difficult to distinguish who's who, all being a metaphor for the theme of the deception and the reality of the conflict that they're in, with a unique puppeteer above the two forces. There are three major participants in the Battle of Geonosis: the Jedi, the clones of the newly found Grand Army of the Republic, and the mighty Separatist droid army. For the Jedi, their values are put into question, as the movie explores the idea of what is a soldier and how should they be used, as the Jedi have always been conversely recognized as the guardians of peace and justice.
We're keepers of the peace, not soldiers.
Yet, they find themselves in an all-out war and dying on the battlefield, well before the clones ever arrive, as they must bend their ideals in the name of the greater good. And, speaking of the clones, they're used to juxtapose the droids, as they represent the theme of people versus technology. The clones are obviously human, however, their identical genetics make them uniform, which makes them feel more robotic. Shows like the Clone Wars, as well as novels and legends such as the Republic Commando series or the MedStar duology, take the time to showcase more of their individuality. However, in Attack of the Clones, they're generally indistinguishable. The droids, on the other hand, are literally machines representing the industrial nature of the government and how they see soldiers as completely expendable, making the use of violence an easier pill to swallow for the Separatists, as no one organic life is actually pulling the trigger or giving their own life for the cause. The Separatists as a faction in general highlight the concept of resisting the government and creating one's own alliance, similar to the rebels, ironically enough, whereas the Republic looks to maintain their ways as the Empire would eventually attempt to do as well. The clones and droids are shown to be similar to one another, not only in battle, but in how they're used for their factions, as both sides are seen as expendable, being pawns in the greater game and chess match that their leader in Palpatine is playing, creating war and chaos to better his position. Prior to the battle, we see how the Republic and the Jedi are making the same mistakes as their opponents, involving themselves in an armed conflict and trying to win in terms of numbers.
200,000 units are ready, with 1 million more well on the way.
And when their battle droids are combined with yours, we shall have an army greater than any in the galaxy. The Jedi will be overwhelmed.
We also see the clear visual similarities between the cloning facility and the droid foundry, using conveyor belts and mass production to generate an army, begging the question of the ethics behind raising humans with the sole purpose of battle. When the battle begins, the Jedi especially, and the droids find themselves in a gladiator or Colosseum style combat, which is appropriate as the Separatist leaders see themselves similar to Roman emperors who watch similar combat for sports and entertainment, having violence for the sake of it and crowning a champion. When the clones arrive, they showcase their prowess as warriors as they're more proficient as soldiers, which emphasizes the theme of humanity being superior to an over-reliance on technology, as the droids had the numbers but still find themselves on the run from a tactically sound clone trooper. The AT-TEs are reminiscent of the AT-ATs, obviously much smaller though, which shows that they are strong but not overwhelmingly at a greater advantage than their opposition.
Victory! Victory, you say, Master Obi-Wan? Not victory. The shroud of the dark side has fallen. Begun. The Clone War has.
The final line of the film sums it up best. Mirroring Empire, it ends on a foreboding note after a victory, and Empire ends with optimism after a loss. Every action has a consequence, and while they were able to rescue Obi-Wan and unveil the Separatists' true intentions before matters could have gotten worse, the consequence of war is upon them, as the very thing they were trying to avoid will lead to an all-out galactic war. When peace was kept for so long, the Republic unknowingly begins its descent, not realizing that this was the first step to taking down democracy and building an empire, foreshadowed in the uniformity of the clones, which would turn into the inspiration for the Imperial Stormtrooper. And talking about links between the two trilogies, I'll give the floor back to Staren.
Thanks a lot, my friend. Yeah, all those cross-trilogies differences and similarities echoes with one of George Lucas' most famous quote.
You see the echo of where it all is going to go. Again, it's like poetry, so if they rhyme, every stanza kind of rhymes with the last one.
And the reason we decided to offer you a double analysis of Hoth and Jonas' battles lays exactly here. On the scale of events, thematics, design, and many more, those battles are deeply connected. To begin with, the two occur in the central episode of their trilogy. They both display a conflict in which a faction is presented as the invader, while the other one is trying to flee, planning their escape in an underground headquarters. The setup, as evoked throughout the two videos, are pretty similar too. A desert plain with a rocky background with one major color. The vehicles themselves mirror each other, with snow speeders kinda echoing clone gunships, and the ion cannon and clones lasers both used to bring a ship down. Some very specific shot composition are also too similar to be a coincidence. They testify that a special care was put to work out the saga's coherence, just like a poem. But what's even more interesting is the way those two sequences differ in very precise key elements. They are not merely different, they are inverted. And the reason why they are is because the central point of Star Wars is in its middle, when liberty dies just before hope rebirths. As a result, each battle's outcome reflects the overall motion of its trilogy. Rebels manage to escape, a key step in their journey towards final victory against the Empire, but the Republic fails at catching Dooku, getting closer to the collapsing it will face in Episode 3. Even their position inside the movie, ending of Episode 2 and beginning of Episode 5, further add to the balance of the saga. This was for the geopolitics of Star Wars, but the same goes for its characters. We said that the environment of the two battles is similar in aesthetic, but they are also obviously different in color and temperature. As explained earlier, they reflect the character's state of mind. Anakin is experiencing a blazing anger when Luke faces a chilling fear. But if you take a step back, the two possible paths for Anakin are represented in colors. Blue tones of Coruscant meant loving moments with Padme, while Tatooine and Geonosis red calls for anger. As for Luke, he'll also face those two colors during Episode 5, sometimes in the same set when temptation is at its highest. But in those decisive battles, Lucas makes it clear about what lays ahead of them by immersing them into the symbolic color of each side of the Force. If you take a close look to the battle structure, it also seems inverted. Empire invades from right to left, while the Droid army defends from left to right. Simple, Well, maybe it hides a bigger thinking.
So what I told you was true, from a certain point of view.
A certain point of view?
Let me explain myself. The fact that first the Separatists try to escape the planet and then the Rebels could wrongly make you think that an inversion has been made, that the faction running away switched from the bad guys to the good ones. But to me, that is quite the opposite. In the end, the Empire wasn't born out of the Separatist movement, but rather from the corrupted Republic, in which lays the many flaws of an oppressive system. Yeah, it is the Republic that invades an indigenous planet. It is the Republic that sins out of pride by landing an army of so-called invincible Jedi. And lastly, it is the Republic that neglects individual life with its clone army. In a way, they are no better than the Separatists, and this is expressed through similarities with them. A mass-produced army raised in an egotistical excess after their own image. We already tackled the Geonosians and battle droids' sameness. But look at the clones. All white with sharp dark eyes and with a distinct crest on top of the head, worn only by male Kaminoans. In the end, the design similarities makes it clear. AT-ATs are clear offsprings of the Republic ATTEs, and same goes for the Acclamators and Star Destroyers. And I mean, check out the titles of episodes 2 and 5. They mirror each other. The faction attacking is the Republic, directly linked to the Empire. To finish with, the thematic of nature, central in Star Wars, is researched through the battles. As we saw, both factions in Geonosis are doing it wrong, using the natural terrain as a battlefield that they will alter forever. On the contrary, Rebels used nature in a more symbiotic way, hiding in its caves and riding its animals. Luke on his Tauntaun can quickly be compared to Anakin riding the Reek a bit earlier. A relation with nature that the Jedi should have kept, staying connected to what really matters, instead of surrounding themselves with technology. That's it, we tried to give you a complete and interesting analysis of those two famous battles. To those of you coming from Crazy Kaz's channel, I hope you'll appreciate the stuff you will find in mine. Please tell us if you like this kind of double video.
If you do, we might do it again in the future.
See you next time.